Hi, my name is Eric Rayberg, and I want to thank all of you for joining today, and thank you for the opportunity to be able to present at this conference. Um, my presentation is going to be on maximizing the benefits of behind-the-meter water heater control. And so a little bit of background about me. I have been in the energy technology industry for over 15 years. I started my career at the research and development group within American Electric Power, and then I went on to Battelle Memorial Institute, which is the world's largest nonprofit research institute. And we developed the technology that ultimately we get spun out into Armada Power, which is the company I currently work for. And much of the data that I'll be showing you today is actually collected from the commercial operations that we've collected at Armada Power. So some background on why we might care about this topic. I think if you take a look at the trends in the economic costs around renewable generation, as well as the political trends for renewables, I think most people would believe that we're going to be looking at a future where the generation mix is going to substantially change from dispatchable generation, fossil fuel generation, to more renewable sources, which are ultimately tied to things like the wind and the sun. So the bottleneck that we're going to see here very quickly, or we actually really are seeing now, is that storage becomes the linchpin here. So as we can get more and more low-cost storage out there, that is going to then accelerate the adoption of renewables, and then, of course, the need for yet more storage. So, battery technology, electrochemical battery technology is constantly improving. It is constantly dropping in price. But I believe that things like maximizing thermal loads, so storage that's already out there inherent in load control, is going to be an important piece, even if we have a lot of batteries out there, because you're going to get a hybrid benefit of controlling fast responding loads in tandem with batteries, and you're going to reduce the cycle time on those electrochemical batteries, and then ultimately create a hybrid asset for grid management. And I think one of the key issues as well is not only addressing this from a technology and economics perspective, but looking at the regulatory environment and what are regulators doing to encourage the adoption of this type of technology. So why water heating? A lot of the techniques that I'm going to talk about today, you could apply to other loads, right? You could do this with vehicle charging, you could do this with HVAC, industrial controls. But my specialization is water heating. It's what I know, so that's what I wanted to talk about today. But really, it's applicable to a lot of places. However, there's a number of advantages to water heating. So first being is that it's actually a pretty substantial load. In the residential space, it's the second highest energy consuming device in your house. And there's a lot of them out there. There's 40 million plus electric water heaters in the US alone. And so to me, that's a really underutilized asset. The other nice thing about it is pretty non-invasive. So if you manage air conditioning, for example, on the hottest day in the summer, people will tend to notice that. And in fact, air temperature is one of those things where there is no comfortable temperature. The same person might say, hey, I feel cold today just for whatever reason. And then you add on the psychological aspect of somebody else controlling it. And people sometimes get frustrated with it. Whereas what we found is water heating is one of those invisible appliances. The nice thing about the physics of it, and I've sort of drawn it out here in this cartoon, is that your water heater is just a simple tube. So cold water comes in the bottom and hot water comes out of the top. And the temperature differential between those regions of water means that it doesn't really mix. So you have time before when the energy needs to be put in to reheat that tank. And by playing with that time, what you have is essentially storage. You have load shifting capabilities that can have a big impact on the power grid. The other nice thing too about water heating is that it's a really simple application. There's very fast response asset that you can get out of it because there's no compressor cycle times you have to worry about. The water heater really does not care if you switch it on within milliseconds and switch it off again within another millisecond. It's fine with doing that. So there's a number of different advantages, I think, for picking up control of water heating. So the data that I'll be showing you today, we collect from devices like this. It's a retrofit controller that installs on a water heater in about 15 minutes. This is just your standard tanked electric water heater you're going to find in closets and basements all over America. We take two temperature measurements. So we tuck two little probes in under the insulation at the top and bottom access hatches. So that's how we know what that stratification of temperature is in the tank. And then we don't touch the thermostat settings. So whatever the homeowner would have had as their settings, whatever temperature they like, that's what we manage within. So there's kind of a natural dead band within that mechanical thermostat that we're able to operate within. So then we also collect power data from a revenue grade chip on board with a switching element that's rated for millions of cycles. So a lot of advanced grid applications are more than just turning on and off a water heater once a day or once a month. But when you do things like renewables integration, you may be switching the device very often. So having a really long life relay has been helpful for us. And then finally, these things are going in people's homes and becoming a grid asset. So cybersecurity is a critically important point for me. We put authentication and encryption on all of these connections so that your data is protected and then your grid asset is protected as well. And these devices are all Wi-Fi, so very, very low cost backhaul solution. So here's some data that we collect off of a single water heater. So what this is a water heater that's been running for months, and we averaged out the 15-minute interval energy data every day. So across the bottom here is 24 hours in a day, every 15 minutes. And the height of the gold bar in each of those 15 minutes is how much energy that tank used on average during that time period of the day. And so you see this kind of shape up here where, middle of the night, people aren't really using energy, but they get up and shower in the morning. There's some intermittent usage throughout the day. And then, there's a peak in the evening, and you'll notice there's this dead zone here where there's no power usage, and that's because this water heater is on a time of use rate. So their utility has a on-peak price that is like quadruple that of their off-peak price. So there's an economic incentive to help this user consume less energy during this window. And then the red and blue lines are those temperature measurements that I showed you earlier. So the top red three lines, there's three dotted lines there. That it's the max, the minimum, and median temperatures that were ever observed during this period, and then the same for this blue line. And so as you can see, the top line remains fairly flat. This is still within the hot range, where if you were taking a shower, you wouldn't really notice that something was different with your water heater. You might have to move the knob one way or the other slightly, but you would still be getting effectively hot water. And then the bottom temperature does deviate much more, which is pretty typical for a water heater. And you can see that over the curtailment period, it drops a little bit. And then in addition to this time of use optimization, the fleet can also do demand response events as well. So you can stage those throughout the day as, if that was what your utility program was using it for. And this is the same plot, but I just wanted to highlight two areas of it. The first is that in this region here, you actually see an increase in temperature right before that curtailment window. So if you just had a dumb timer on your water heater to do your time of use optimization, it would save you money during that period. But the problem is that it's going to kick out kind of randomly wherever your temperature band on your mechanical thermostat was. So the natural mechanical thermostats on a water heater create this sort of sawtooth pattern where they kick in and kick out. When you have fine control over the device, what you can do is you can wait and heat the tank up to the top of its mechanical thermostat limit right before the curtailment event, which gives you a little bit more ride-through time. And then following the event, you also can feather that load back in at the fleet level so that you don't set another peak immediately after the peak that you were trying to avoid. And you can combine that with SCADA data as well, too. So if you're watching, say, feeder load or substation load or pricing point load in a transmission zone, you can use that to sort of feather load back in to make sure that you're not damaging the system by curtailing and then turning on a whole bunch of water heaters. And then here's another example of that same tank, but just doing it during the wintertime. So in the wintertime, they were dealing with a morning peak period, and you can also shape load in the morning peak as well. So a single water heater isn't that important, but if you have fleets of water heaters, then it becomes a really cohesive grid asset. So if you take thousands of water heaters in a region and control all of them in tandem, now you can do things like support capacity constraints on transmission or distribution system. You can time it with renewable output. So look for differences between your forecast and actual outputs on a renewable farm. And then use it for things like grid reliability improvements. We've actually had a lot of success in managing load after an outage. So if there's been a long outage, we shut all the water heaters off when they restore load. so that it doesn't set another, you don't end up tripping out a recloser or blowing a fuse when you're trying to restore a section of line. And this isn't a science experiment. I mean, we're seeing a pretty good amount of commercial adoption across the country. We have thousands of units deployed across the U.S. in a mix of places. So, regional transmission organizations, investor-owned utilities, cooperative utilities, and they're value stacking this. So you're getting your traditional demand response, which I think a lot of people are pretty familiar with, along with a time of use optimization, fast frequency regulation, renewables integration. You're able to sort of stack a lot of these benefits because you're able to provide them throughout different times of the day. So you could do, say, frequency regulation throughout the morning hours, and then switch over to just a curtailment to avoid a peak. And then you have something, you have additional data points for if you're doing conservation voltage reduction. Now it's another checkpoint that you're watching the voltage in all these water heaters out there on your distribution circuit. So we're looking for ways to try to stack that value as much as possible for the utility, and that's how you're able to kind of get adoption of this concept as they deploy it in their service territories. I also wanted to show this too, because this is kind of gets back to that theme around non-invasiveness and customer value. If you have, say, a dumb device out there, a one-way communicating device, you don't get data back on it, you might not know that something has gone wrong with a piece of equipment. So this actually happened in a co-op that we deployed at. We had gotten an alert that, hey, the heating element or the thermostat failed on this water heater. Notified the co-op. They were able to go out there and fix the unit before their member even knew. So they really like this because they got to thinking about it, and they're like, well, what would the member experience have been if we didn't have this alert, right? The member, all they would have seen was utility comes in, puts this box in my water heater, things are fine. 2 weeks later, I get drastically less hot water, right? So immediately you're going to think, well, the last thing that touched this was the utility. It must be their stupid program. This box is causing me cold water. I'm going to call someone and have them rip this out. So instead, this was hey, we see this issue before the homeowner even knew about it, right? They didn't even take a shower yet or use their hot water, and the co-op's already able to contact them and say, hey, we need to get someone out there to help repair this. So it flipped it from a feel bad moment into a feel good moment because now the customer's like, hey, wow, this is great. You guys actually fixed the issue before I had to go jump into a cold shower. And then the visibility back to the co-op is, well, we know this device is now performing and is actually giving us a grid benefit, not just blindly sitting out there and failed and bypassed because the customer has been upset with the program. So I think that's an important theme with a lot of the load management side of things, is that there's an opportunity to manage the load for a grid benefit, but you also have to make sure that the end use customer is also happy with what you're doing, because they're going to kick you out of their house if they don't like it. We deploy a lot in multifamily, in apartment complexes, and the maintenance staff really like this too, because now it gives you data. Their maintenance techs go in knowing what parts to look at first, and it just reduces their repair time, and oftentimes saves a middle of the night or weekend call. So if I had to say, list out some key points on what would be a good program for load management in general, but any sort of behind the meter program, really it comes down to, I think you have to have strong cybersecurity countermeasures. Again, these are devices that are going to people's houses. A lot of IoT devices have had some pretty poor cybersecurity in the past, and it's kind of damaged the reputation of the industry. And it's a grid asset. You're going to be controlling, megawatts of load at some point. And you need to be sure that those devices have strong data integrity. Then the second piece is measurement and verification, right? So utilities are constantly trying to justify to their stakeholders, whether it's a regulator, a state regulatory commission, their members, their own executive teams. Did this asset actually perform the way that we wanted it to? So having really good measurement data to be able to say, hey, look, this is how the fleet behaved as a whole. It's curtailing, it's giving you the grid performance that you want, and there were no customer issues because we have the data on their comfort levels. So we know that we're not impacting customers, and we can tweak the program as necessary. And then again, that kind of gets back to that customer comfort issue, and having really good quality components, because I think a lot of switches in the past have had issues with failing. Maybe they're not UL listed, maybe they're not long life devices. So it goes around, yeah, to just being, looking at this like a 10-year, multi-decade asset like utilities typically deploy. And then finally, I think software has to be easy to use. It has to be intuitive. Some utilities are extremely well staffed. They have a lot of resources for load forecasting and grid operations. But we also serve small co-ops as well. So it might be one person who has to actually schedule events and manage the system from their phone. So making it very easy to use to set up and configure it for your system, because you may have a wide range of different zones. Those are all, I think, really important aspects to having a successful program. And then the other big picture piece here, and I think the mindset that we need to sort of create, especially on the regulatory side, is that much of the utility industry is driven by regulatory limitations, or regulatory rules, I should say. So, electric utilities, especially investor utilities, they have to meet the legislative requirements of their region, but they also have to keep the lights on. They can't really buy or make money, spend money without regulator approval. And after the fact, they have to justify what they did was right. So I think, the key issue here is the regulatory environment needs to look beyond just single device energy efficiency. I think that was kind of the old school way of encouraging people to say buy an efficient refrigerator or something like that, because you could look at the device and say this is more efficient than the previous, so it makes sense. When you're looking at grid assets, though, it's not just within the water heater or within the HVAC system or the envelope of the house. It's looking at the entire system, because if you're load shifting, you may not actually be reducing energy usage, but you could be greatly reducing carbon production because you're using a low carbon generation source. And then likewise, stacking that value across your generation, transmission, and distribution silos. The electrons don't know which bin they're in. They don't know that they're behind the meter, but you could be making a huge benefit in the transmission system. You could be reducing congestion that would be way outside your visibility if you were just capturing value behind the meter. So that, I think, is another aspect of the regulatory environment that needs to change. And then obviously, aggregation of small assets. And that in part also, I think, falls on the technology provider's responsibility to make sure that the metering and aggregation of that data is good. And so, regulators and utilities will rely on it because it is highly accurate and it's quality controlled. And so to wrap up with a few final points, I believe that the grid of the future is going to be significantly renewable. And with that change in generation mix, it is going to require a lot of storage. Combining batteries with all of the controllable load that's out there is, to me, a no-brainer, right? There's a lot of value to be picked up by controlling all these low-cost energy storage assets that are already out there. And it's going to end up improving the lifespan of batteries as well, because now you'll have a hybrid asset to be able to control things in real time very quickly with something that doesn't really care about cycle life limitations, and then you can use and lean on your batteries for the longer term day to night cycles with renewables. And I think, of all the controllable loads out there, water heaters are a pretty excellent choice. There's a lot of them out there. They consume a lot of power, a lot of energy, and they're pretty durable. So, if you have controls that are highly secure, that you can trust will be authenticated and will protect both, end users' privacy along with the grid asset, and then combining that with algorithms that also maintain customer satisfaction, so people aren't bailing on your program, then you have the recipe for success. And then finally, I think the regulatory world needs to look at this as not only should they not prohibit assets to be able to provide value across these different stacks in the generation stack, but they should actually encourage it, because you are leaving a lot of value on the table if you only draw the box around, say, the envelope of the house, or only look at one aspect of energy efficiency. You need to take a look at what can you do across those generation, transmission, distribution lines, take advantage of the low-cost assets that you have, and use that in order to help maintain grid stability, reduce costs, and improve the amount of renewable generation that you're going to be able to get on the grid. So that's all I have for this presentation. I believe we have some time for questions, so I would like to thank all of you for listening to the presentation, and I'd love to hear what questions you have for me. Thank you.